pop music. You ready for it? I'm going to talk to you about pop music. Are you ready? Well, at least that's what just came out of my mouth. I'm going to talk to you about pop music. Let me tell you about pop music. I don't know why, but I just don't. There's sometimes when I think about this podcast and I don't care about it. And that just makes me so sad. We live in such a confessional culture. It's so confessional. It's so like we just can't get enough of psychology or psychiatry, whatever way that you're supposed to say it. I always wanted to say psychology because that makes more sense to me to say psychology than psychiatry. But I think the proper term is psychiatry, and but it doesn't matter. Psychiatry or psychology, either one, but they're not interchangeable. I don't really know the difference. It's just, wouldn't you see a psychologist, somebody who can tell you what's wrong with your mind? I guess maybe people associate it with somebody who's like a fortune teller or something, and that's why we say you're a psychiatrist. But it's probably a blatant difference that I'm just not recognizing or not drawing attention to. Psychiatry, like we live in a confessional culture, like really, at least we did for a little while. I mean, like all the SoundCloud rappers, they always rap about how sad all of them are, how sad they are, and how terrible their lives are. Just like how they just got to do tons of drugs and they got to sip nothing but purple and take a lot of Xanax and that kind of thing. They got to take tons of Xan, and that's what they have to do. And I'm not going to fault them for that. If I lived that lifestyle, then I would do all the same things, obviously. I just said if I lived the lifestyle, which infers already that I do all of the things, if the premise is true. If I live that lifestyle. People limit themselves. They do. I'm finding a topic. I was going to do pop music, confessional culture. People limit themselves. Here it is. Whatever thing, I don't know. I want to also talk about time and what I think about time. This is what I think about time. It's just like, it's hard to really capture everything that I think about it in one. Maybe here's what I do. Here's what you do. You do like a 5-hour podcast and talk the fuck out of time and talk about what time is. I want to talk about what I want to explain time from my perspective. But pop music, entertainment. And because the best kind of episode really would be one where I have half an idea and then I work it out while I'm talking. And I don't know that I've recorded an episode where I did that exactly yet. Well, yeah, it's not, I don't think it's really good unless I'm riffing on it, unless it's natural, because anytime that I try to set it up like I'm going to do the episode about this, I start writing it off like 30 seconds into me talking, and you don't even hear any of those that I record. Then I wouldn't record them. But like now that I have a podcast, because I didn't have an outlet for things that I thought before, now that I have a podcast, I'm just going crazy like, oh, this can be like thinking of possible episodes. And so now I have 1,000 possible ones lined up, but I don't want to fuck it up in whatever. Like I want to get the most out of all of them. I don't want to waste it. And I think that that's just a really big overarching lie. Like it's an underlying lie to not just me, for me especially, but I think for lots of people, that you will either run out of things to say at a place, or not have enough things to say, or like maybe, probably to lots of people, including myself, the thought of starting a podcast is like, well, I might be able to make a couple episodes, but then what would I say past that? And that is a worry. Like, oh, what if I run out of things to say? But I believe ultimately, it is endless. It's endless what you have to say. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be able to start a podcast. But I believe that you ultimately ultimately there's no limit, because if you get on the other side of consciousness, meaning you get on the other side of all the decorum and pleasantries we have to exchange with each other in order to carry out normal shit with each other, in order to carry out society at large, society through patterns that that the society itself is built on. Once we get past that, if you can get past that, then you reach a state that isn't so calculated. And I think I think that it's just like a lot of untapped potential that everybody has. Like, everybody has the chance to speak a ton of truth from their own perspective if you understand that you don't have to be limited by societal norms, because societal norms are very, very limiting. They're incredibly limiting. Do you ever think about they're so limiting? Like, somebody asks, just like it's not okay to be sad, first of all. Just for one, just think about that. It's not really okay to be sad in our society, because the way that we talk to each other, and the way that our consciousness has been built to function. And when I say consciousness, I'm talking about all of the practices that we need to go through, like the consciousness that's been built into us from an evolutionary standpoint over thousands of years or whatever, through us speaking to each other and developing ways to communicate in order to get by. But consciousness is like, it's like a mask for your subconscious, where I'm saying that your subconscious is where you can be creative and where you can speak from a place of individual and subjective truth, is kind of more from your subconscious. And that's more like you just speaking naturally. You're able to speak naturally. And there's plenty of people that can speak naturally, and it's not like the consciousness side of it, or like all the rules that you have to go through to talk with people and all the etiquette and all that. It might not be so much of a hindrance for them, even though it is systemic for everybody. Like, consciousness is systemic for everybody to a certain point, because our society, because collectively we engage in consciousness with each other. Like, our consciousnesses talk to each other in consciousness type ways, meaning like just all the facial expressions that are acceptable for you to have in a given day, or at work, for a particular environment, at a party or whatever. Like, if you're at work, you can't have like silly facial expressions, or you can't, when you say hi to people, it has to be, and really there's a finite set of facial expressions that are generally acceptable for all occasions. And because there's only a finite number of them. We've defined certain facial expressions. And consciousness is what I'm talking about. Like, from an evolutionary standpoint, us building that into ourselves is what we've defined. And it's mostly what I'm speaking from for the idea of consciousness versus like subconsciousness or unconsciousness, either one of those terms for the opposing idea, like something for what's further back in you, like a more truthful position for you to speak from is your subconscious or your unconscious. Your conscious, like, it's not like it's not truthful to engage in all these practices, but it's the practices are from a perspective of definition. And the consciousness that I'm talking about is described by Carl Jung in the book Man and His Symbols, I think, which I started to read. Really, I read a chapter of it, and he was talking about consciousness. That's as far as I got. So I'm going off of that idea of consciousness, but I know what he was talking about. But that was the first time I had heard it consciousness attributed to that idea. But it's a great term for it because it describes like all the definitions that we've built into ourselves as a society in order to communicate with each other, because consciousness and like the set of mannerisms that is acceptable, the set of body language mannerisms or facial expressions or tones or words, the set of words that is acceptable for a particular environment or for society at large, that is it's a finite set of things wherein you have the potential to have infinite facial expressions or infinite body languages or infinite different words. You can define infinite things, yet we subject ourselves to only a finite number of them in order to carry out pleasantries with each other, because we limit ourselves to those pleasantries and to the rules of the decorum that we have to carry out. Decorum, pleasantries, rules, limit, and that's what I'm saying to you, literally. And I'm saying it's just this one big conglomerate thing, all of that. That's why I keep repeating the same words, because I guess I'm just trying to build the idea for you, and that's how I'm doing it. I'm trying to relate, because all those terms are really strongly related. But there's only a few there's like a certain number of facial expressions that you get to use when you're talking to people at work, or there's just ways, there's rules of going about it. And that's basically like a mask for what you really are, because you got to limit yourself to a finite number of interactions that are possible for you when you yourself are capable of infinite of them, especially when you consider your individual subconscious, which is basically an infinite space out of which you can say anything, like really, really deep down. That's what I believe, is that deep down you kind of have the potential to be anything once you get past the consciousness side of it, which is what we've built into ourselves and what we practice every day. And we practice it, and in doing so, it inevitably limits us, because we take on those identities. We take on the identities of the things that we practice when we talk to each other. Even around our friends and our family, you might go deeper into what you think is true. You can have deeper discussions about things. But even then, eventually, with whatever group of friends, you have like identities, and you have identities that you have to carry out in like ways that they've begun to define you, and that you have ways that you've chosen to identify yourself around groups of friends that eventually, if it's a group of friends been around each other for a while, like everybody's identities are sort of set in place to the point that it's difficult to change your identity, because it is not just you trying to change it. It's also like your identity as perceived from other people is an important part of it, because there's like a subjective side to building your identity, and there's an objective side wherein people like determine your identity, but you don't have to give power to the side of it where people determine your identity, because the truth of the matter is, like, your friends, especially if they're your real friends, you will allow for you to change in ways that you yourself deem to be dramatic changes. Your real friends will allow you to change if you feel like, oh, there's this that I want to change about myself. I'm tired of like being this identity around this group of friends or around this group of people. I wish I could change. People that are normal, like, people will accept it, because ultimately they have to accept it, because as long as you're doing it, and I'm describing for you like the rut that people get into, which is that they think that they're not allowed to change because they've taken on a certain identity around a group of friends or around coworkers or whatever. And so they can't just start being somebody else, even though they're capable of being that. And that's sort of what I'm saying, is that people are capable of being lots of different identities with this. People are capable of being lots of different identities. Um, and ignoring their consciousness, at least temporarily, in order to manifest different identities. But people get into that rut of saying that they can only be a certain identity around a group of people, like whatever way that they've been. And especially the longer, like if you've been around your coworkers for 5 years, you've generally done all the same set of actions and exchanged with people the same way, then you are that identity, and it's difficult to change. Now, you can change, and ultimately it's not going to make any difference. And they might be like, oh, you're like, over time, if you allow your personality to change, and like you are allowed yourself to be more of what you are, rather than an identity limited to just one place that you go. Because the truth is, whatever group of people that you're around, you have a slightly different identity. You have slightly different identities with whoever you're around. And that's not a bad thing. And I used to think that it was a bad thing, and I know it's not a bad thing, because that's just the way that people are. Like, you are slightly different around different people, because you have to play to the audience. Slightly, you could consider it an audience, but you have to, I mean, you're going to find truth about yourself differently in different people. And the reason that you make friends with different people is because you see different things of yourself in them, that you both connect because of this. And like, you can sort of see through all of your different friends, like what you have in common with them. And it's usually a different thing that you have in common with all of them. And so that's going to generate speech between you. It's going to generate a relationship that's different from all your other relationships. You have different relationships than with everybody, you know? And so because of that, you have slightly different identities around all these different people. And you, besides that, have the capability to have a lot of different identities with people you've never even been friends with. Like, you yourself are capable of a lot, I would say. I don't think you're really limited. It's just you end up being limited because you're in a lot of stale situations that cause you to end up being like just a pattern of the same thing over and over again, especially if it's like a stale situation or whatever, or a situation that doesn't foment discovery or opportunity for things to be new. Like, if it's an environment that is obviously going to stay the same into the future, then it's going to cause you to not care about changing so as to keep that part of yourself, or that identity and that person you are, around a group of people alive. You won't care about keeping it alive if it's a situation that is dying, or like a situation that doesn't care about staying alive. But that's part of the reason why people like alcohol so much, is because it gives you the opportunity to be whatever you want around a group of people that you've been the same person around every day for 5 years. You know, you can be drunk and then be anybody. That's why people like alcohol, is because it takes the blame away. You don't have to bear the responsibility of changing all of a sudden. You don't have to bear the responsibility to yourself of being somebody different when you are capable of being somebody different. It allows you to be who you are. It allows you to take on identities that you want to take on, but you are unable to when you're sober, because when you're sober, you have to bear all the blame yourself. But when you're drunk, you can blame the alcohol. So alcohol takes your blame. And then when you wake up, you realize the blame again. And then you, like, sometimes, you know, at least I do, like, sometimes, like, I feel blameworthy after a night of drinking, even though and not just because of drinking, but like, just like blame, or like, because of what you said the night before, even though you didn't say anything really controversial. Like, you feel some blame, because the blame rushes back to you after you were blaming alcohol the entire night. The blame comes back to you, and you can go, like, I can go further with the analogy and say that, like, because when you're throwing up, it's just like you getting rid of the blame, getting rid of the blame, you know, because the alcohol is the blame and you throw up to get rid of it. You're sick because of it. You're sick because of the blame. And like, honestly, when I'm sick, a lot of times I can't stand up straight. Like the second I try to stand up straight, I need to throw up. Like I can't stand up straight. And to me, it feels like it's because to me at this point, I associate sickness so much with guilt and blame that like when I try to stand up, I throw up because it's like something like I don't feel worthy to like bear the burden of the world. Like I'm not capable of bearing it because I'm sick. And so that causes me to feel blameworthy and guilty and not able to stand up straight. And like, especially if I'm already upset to my stomach, because when I'm sick to my stomach, I feel bad. Like I shouldn't be, like I need to not throw up. And if I do throw up, then I fail, you know? And it's just like, it's a thing. Like I gotta not throw up or else I fail, because I feel worthy of blame more so when I'm sick for whatever reason. Like I feel the guilt of the world, and that's probably more particular to me. And like when I am really sick and especially needing to throw up or whatever, I always feel like I have all these places that I have to be, or like I'm letting everybody down. Like everybody I know needs me to be where they are, but I'm not, but I'm just like sick. Because I associate it with, because it is just like guilt. I understand that it makes me guilty, and it's not false that I feel that way, because it is true. It's just, I can't escape from guilt when I'm sick. And because of that, I'm more like I'm not able to do anything when I'm sick. If I'm sort of sick or like have a bad cold, I can't do chores or anything. I just have to sit down and do nothing until it's gone, because it entirely overtakes me and I'm overwhelmed by like how guilty and paranoid I feel. So I feel paranoid about that I need to be a bunch of places and that like everybody is upset that I'm sick, you know? So what am I talking about? I'm talking about guilt. I'm talking about how alcohol is like, it's the same thing as blame, or you change it into blame. You treat it as blame when you're drinking it sometimes, if you are just drinking it to get drunk and to make your problems go away or whatever. But so you get into a rut with the identities that you have in different places, and those identities are limiting factors that are a result of you having to engage in commonalities that are true to your culture. You have to engage in commonalities that are true to your culture, and that causes you to be slightly a robot. You know, you're slightly a robot at work because there's only like the 10 faces that you get to make, and there's only like the 20 sentences outside of work talk that you get to say. And I'm not just talking about work, because you can have a workplace that's fun. I'm just talking about like a general environment that is not very freeing, a general like superficial sort of environment. But you are, so like in a general superficial environment like work, you have you only get to do, like you're slightly a robot because you're slightly calculated in what you do. But like at some point that is just who you are. You're just your identity only gets to work so far, like only gets so much freedom to say different things or whatever. But But yeah, so because of that, there's systemic things. There's systemic problems that are related to consciousness, like all of our consciousnesses. Because the thing is, underneath the consciousness is unconscious, is subconscious, is a place where all of us live at a greater level of truth, in my opinion. And it's a truth that we're capable of. We're capable of not engaging in all these specific identities, but we do. Like, to me, the real elephant in the room, like, because an elephant in the room is something that you're not talking about. Like, the real ultimate elephant in the room is that we are all talking about nonsense most of the time with each other. That's the elephant in the room. When in reality, we all know we could be talking about things that are further down than that. And it's not like we do a bad job of that now. We don't. We don't do a bad job of that now. There's nothing wrong with consciousness. And I'm not saying like I or anybody needs to go further. Like, nobody needs to go deeper. What am I saying then? I'm not saying like we need to be more emotional. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying we need to be more emotional. I'm saying that we need to live more as if we have emotions. Like, because emotions aren't acceptable. Emotions aren't really acceptable. Like, being sad isn't acceptable. If somebody people come to my desk and they ask, get this. This is what they ask. Are you ready for it? Here's what they ask me. Okay, here it is. They ask, how are you doing? And I say, good. I say good every time. Stereotypical. The stereotypical answer. The stereotypical question. I'm good. And nobody even, most of the time, they don't even care to try to figure out or elaborate on what's happening with me. Because generally they know I don't really feel like talking. So I don't feel like talking. There's this one guy, though, who is my supervisor. And when I say good, he always stops because he knows that I'm not emphasizing it. I'm not really sincere. He's like, oh, well, are you sure? You seem uncertain. And he's right, because I am uncertain. I am uncertain about being good because I am good and bad all the time. I'm good and bad. I'm not good like all the way. And it's part of just the perspective that I'm speaking from. Like, I know that I am both good and bad, but more so than that, it's not like I have to be happy. And I'm not happy a lot of the time. I'm not happy a lot of the time, but you have to say that you're good because you can't say that you're bad. And when you ask somebody, how are you doing? And then they're like, well, I'm not doing well. And like, everybody in that situation is just like, ew, I don't want to deal with that. Like, oh, I don't want to hear your story. But so somebody asks you, it's just that I wish I could get more into this point. I wish I could get more fucking into the point, and I'm mad because I was thinking about it earlier and I was like, oh, that's a great point. And now I'm not saying it with any passion whatsoever because I already thought about it. I'm fucking mad. It's just that like, he'll come over and he'll ask that and I say I'm good and he's like, well, are you sure? But if I said, oh, I'm bad, he'll be like, oh, what's wrong? And that's not what I'm excited about either. Like, that's a dumb response. If that's annoying. I'm bad. And then they say, oh, what's wrong? Because you can be bad. And our society isn't open-minded enough to accept somebody or to understand that people are capable of being not that great and still being happy about it. Our society isn't open-minded enough to accept that kind of person. They don't allow for that. That's because society only allows for a particular set of identities. They only allow, they're not open-minded enough to think about somebody who's like, oh, I'm bad, but I don't really care. Like me, myself, I haven't been that happy my entire life. I'm not that happy. I don't look back and be like, oh, I was really happy then. I'm never happy, but I'm not sad either. It's just both of them. But it has to do with that I'm not really content. And that's just kind of the person that I am. So it's not like, oh, I'm unhappy, so therefore something's got to be wrong, or like there's pills for that, or there's a diagnosis that you can get because you're sad. Like, it's just because I'm not content. Like, I'm less content than other people. And it's true that, like, happiness comes from contentedness and peacefulness and allowing peace into your life. Like, just allowing and accepting your life as it is so that you can be peaceful about it and contented about it makes you happy. But just in general, I'm discontented. Like, I don't really care about allowing peace into my life because I want there to be more. I always want there to be more things. And I want there, like in the places that I'm in, I want there to be something at stake with it. I want it to be important. I want it to be competitive. I want there to be like a reason for me doing it. And I want there to be the opportunity for reward or for new things to happen as a result of what I do. I want there to be something at stake. I want there to be more. I want things to be more interesting than they are. I want there to be more things to realize in the earth. I want there to be like I just want there to be more things. So that makes me kind of discontented. But like we don't have a society that's like, oh, because our society just reacts to sadness like you're a moron or you need to fix it. Our society is just like because if you're sad, then you need to fix it in order to be happy, because we're all supposed to be happy in our society. And that is systemic. It's systemic that we're all supposed to be happy when sadness is just as valid an emotion. In fact, it's like half of the story. It's half the time people are sad. You go up and down. You go up and down. You're sad and you're happy. You cycle through it, you know? It's like half the time people are sad, like either in a day or in a lifetime. Like there are people that are naturally happy all the time. There are people that are naturally sad. There are people that are happy and sad based on whatever day it is. But we don't really accept sadness in our society that way, the same way because we, at least in America, you're supposed to be happy. And if you're not happy, then you should go fix it so that you can be happy. Because if you're like, oh, I'm doing bad, people are like, oh, what's wrong? Because there's something wrong with you. What are you going to, oh, that's terrible. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you feel bad. And it's like, why don't you just let me feel bad rather than being condescending? Because you're being sorry. Oh, I'm sorry about what you said. I'm sorry from my perspective about what you said, you yourself said. I'm not going to allow it, though. I'm just sorry. I'm sorry. It's condescending. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Rather than just allowing me to have the emotion of sadness. Because systemically, we don't allow emotion. And we also equate emotion with sadness as part of it too. We're like, if you're being emotional, you're just being hysterical and you need to knock it off and be happy some more because you're like, oh, stop being gloomy all the time. Stop being so mopey when people just are mopey. Like in America, we just want happiness. And I'm not saying that sadness is better than happiness, but I am saying that happiness is not better than sadness. I'm saying that they're equal, and we don't allow for them to be equal. We only allow for happiness to be better than sadness. We only allow for happiness better because that makes more sense, because that's easier for us, because we're all doing good as far as consciousness is concerned. From the perspective of consciousness, and when we're all exchanging pleasantries with each other, we're all doing fine, because that's all that we need to know. It's not about anything deeper than that. That's why we're also in a more superficial environment. You're all just supposed to maintain happiness, because it's not about anything more than that. Don't make it about anything more than that, and don't make it about yourself. Sadness is more it would be more inclined to think than you're making it about yourself. So maybe you are more individual if you're more inclined to be sad rather than happy, because happiness is more go along with everything and say that everything in the world is okay with everybody. So you're more on board with everything that everybody is doing, rather than you would be less on board with it if you felt like you had truths that you yourself had to communicate, that you weren't able to communicate. But it's not like you can communicate. You can be an individual and be somebody who communicates their truths perfectly coherently, but I think it does make you sensationalize yourself more the more that you're an individual, and therefore it makes it more high stakes. Like your success is more dependent on you, and like reality more centers around you. If you're more prone to being sad, if you're more prone to Because if you're more prone to being sad, you're more prone to saying that there's something wrong with you, meaning that you care more about yourself and you're a little bit more high maintenance. You need more attention. And that's part of why, that's the other thing. That's part of why that's part of why we don't like it. It's like, oh, we don't want to give attention to you, and we don't we don't want to feel sympathy. And I would be the first to say that, is that I don't want to feel sympathy for you right now, and I'm not good at it. I'm not able to fake it. I don't care about sympathy for you because I'm self-centered. Sort of, is part of it. But I'm just like I don't care very much about sympathy. But Americans don't want to be patient and sympathize with you and hear from your perspective and validate your emotions. And ultimately, it is the validate your emotions that is the problem. We don't want to validate each other's emotions, because when we validate each other's emotions, we agree to each other's realities. Because a person, in saying that they have emotions, is saying that they are distinguished in some way, in saying that they have emotions, because they're saying that, by saying that their emotions are real, at least, if they really hold to that their emotions are real, but you have emotions that are real. You have emotions that are real, and that's more your subconscious or your unconscious, as opposed to consciousness, because consciousness doesn't deal with emotions. It just deals with calculations and robotness, which doesn't have anything to do with calculation or with emotions. It's just about going along with things and leaving yourself behind. Because if we reach the point where we have to say we're okay with you saying, oh, I don't feel well, like I'm sad, I just am sad for no reason. That's the other thing too. When you say you're sad, there isn't a reason necessarily. And a lot of times when you're really sad, it's because you can't put into words what you're sad about. Like if you're really anxious, anxiety stems from you don't even know what you're upset about, but there's just something wrong that you can't even put into words. Like oftentimes sadness, you can't put into words why you're actually sad when you're actually sad. But anytime you tell somebody you're sad, they want a reason for it. They want a reason because all they know is consciousness. Because all they know is that. And consciousness needs the reason why. Because define it for me, please. Please define it and label it in a nice box for me so that I can explain it to myself and walk away and totally forget about it. Because I'm not going to take the time to understand the depth of your emotions when your emotions do have depth. Like your sadness has a lot of depth to it, and that's why it's hard to explain. But as far as consciousness is concerned, people, in engaging with the decorum of saying hello, they need a hello back. and they need a definition back. They need a yes sir so that they can move along. Yes sir, agree. It's just agreeing. That's what decorum is. That's what consciousness, all of us talking in a superficial environment, it's just agreeing. If you're in an environment where everybody is agreeing with each other, and you can have a group of friends that all the friends agree with each other, and then that becomes a superficial environment, and all that you're doing is agreeing. Then it is like you say, good morning, and how are you doing? Just as a, yes, sir, please move along. We're all in agreement that we're agreeing, right? We're all taking part of the agreement process. And that is the real elephant in the room, is that we're all taking part of the agreement process, when in reality, we want to disagree with each other. That's what I'm talking about. It doesn't have to be like, I'm not talking about that we need to have a big emotional breakthrough, because we've done that plenty of times before, because we live in confession culture. We live in my emotions, I'm so sad, I'm so insecure culture, we live in that. We always have emotional breakthroughs. We're a continual emotional breakthrough. I'm saying that the elephant in the room is that we're all just agreeing to consciousness. We're all agreeing to saying hi and agreeing to saying the same things over again, so that we can all appease ourselves vapidly. We're all agreeing to that when we want to disagree with each other, and we want to, because we have more things to say that are disagreeable and against what our perceived identities are supposed to be in a given group. We have things to say that are against our identities, and we want to say them all the time, because we're sick of maintaining singular identities when we are capable of plurality. Like when we're capable of plural marriage. And that's the other problem. Monogamy? Tired of it. Why are there no nations that are adopting polygamy the entire nation wide? What about that perspective? Come on, polygamy. Let's do this thing. Polygamy now, polygamy forever. I mean, I've been riding the polygamy train for years. Like I'm the conductor. When that train rolls into station, like I don't care. Finally can rest easy. This polygamy's been on my mind, burden on my back for years. Let's get some polygamy going. I don't care what it takes. Just go out, marry. If you're married, marry somebody else. If you're married, start there. You have one wife, get one other wife. It's just one step at a time. If you're not a polygamist now, start to become one. You'll never be in the future what you're not becoming today. And if you're not a polygamist today, you won't be one in the future. So just try to lead one wife to you, one other wife, so that where you start with one wife, that then you have two. And at the second that you have two wives, just start looking around, make connections, conversation and a smile and a good handshake goes a long way to getting multiple wives. If you don't have two wives now, you think that that's just going to happen? So I just want get that polygamy going now. Take it to the next level now. All I want is polygamy, polygamy, baby, polygamy, baby, polygamy, yeah, polygamy, baby. I want it, polygamy, baby, too. 3, 4 wives. Polygamy, baby, I want more wives. Polygamy, baby, give me 3 more wives. Yeah, polygamy, baby, give me 3 more wives than I had when I said 3 wives before us. Polygamy, yeah. I just want polygamy, baby. What I want is polygamy, yeah. Take me there right now. I wanna get some polygamy when I get it, when I wanna. Give me some polygamy every day. I just wanna take it to the next. I'm just very passionate. It's a thing with me. It's a real thing. That's what I realize now. This is all coming up right now. Wow. I just wish I could hash out these feelings of polygamy that I have in a safe environment. Yeah, but if you only have one wife now, just see if you can get a second one. There's a heart for polygamy in this country. I do believe that. I think that there's a beating heart for polygamy, and it's beating red. It's beating your wives. Polygamy. Is that what that's about? I mean, all across this country, like, you'll find people just waiting for the day. Like, and it only takes one, right? It only takes one polygamist catches the right break and makes it to the spotlight to finally show what it's all about. Because it's anyway, that was off-putting. I got into something, and now I started talking about polygamy. Because the real elephant in the room is that we're all disagreeable as fuck. Okay? We're all disagreeable as fuck. And we are tired of agreeing to all the yes, sir. And you might think that you're in a superficial environment where all the drones around you and you yourself are just like, all the people around you are lame and like, oh, they just act like robots. But I think that they're in the same boat as you. That's what I believe. Is that they also have things to say that are beyond the identity that they've presented to you. But everybody everywhere just ends up agreeing to a certain set of rituals in whatever environment, like the rituals that are called for per the environment. You engage in rituals and things that you have to keep going back to in order to maintain the homeostasis of what you're doing, of the group, the homeostasis of the group. But I guess homeostasis would point to it's consistency. I don't know, maybe not homeostasis. I don't know what I'm talking about, because now I'm saying it in a positive light. Why consciousness might be positive, like because there's a place for it, in the same way that there's a place for it, the same way there's a place for homeostasis. But without homeostasis, you can't survive. Homeostasis, what is it? It's like consistency. It's always you, that you stay the same. That's the part of you that always has to stay the same. But you always also have to change your physical self, like through the regeneration of cells. Like, both of those are necessary biological processes as defined for life to continue for you, changing and staying the same. Homeostasis. So I guess in a perfect world, I would make the analogy that one of those is subconscious and one of those is consciousness. Homeostasis and changing. Well, changing is your subconscious and your unconscious. That's what changes all the time. That's where your potential for changing all the time is. But I mean, you only change a certain amount through your regeneration of cells, and you only stay the same a certain amount through homeostasis, because eventually you die. But consciousness, I guess, is more like staying the same. It's more like staying the same, or making it so that everything stays the same. But Um, yeah. And then, okay, so we equate emotion with sadness because if you're being emotional, when in reality, you can have emotions. And we don't ever, because, so we have emotions and they're not, it's not like they have to be sadness too. It's not like you're, because if you are being like, we're just like, oh, don't be so emotional. And we associate the word emotional with like emotional breakthrough or like a time where we all get like three of us gathered and shared our problems and all started crying or some shit like that. Or like there has to be an emotional breakthrough, like at a Christian camp type emotional breakthrough. At least one of the Christian camps that I went to was like that. And what was that place called? Lake and Camp. Lake and Camp. And whatever. And Camp Lake. Very driven by emotion. But like that would be their idea of an emotional breakthrough is like it has to be this big moment where you are like you have it's like you go in there, they assume all the kids going in there have all these problems that they haven't confessed yet. Like that's kind of the mindset that they take on. It's like, well, we need to get them to say the problem so that everybody can have a big crying emotional breakthrough. But like because you have problems already, don't you? You have plenty of things going terribly wrong in your life that you need to say so that you can finally get your emotions out, because that's the only proper way to expend emotion is by saying to a stranger what all your problems are and then crying about it. But so like your emotion, you can just be emotional, but not be like sad and blubbering and like you can have emotion about things, but that's not really acceptable as long as we live in consciousness society, which is mostly void of emotions or makes it so that you can't carry on with emotions, because having emotion and it would be a similar thing just to say that you're passionate about things. Like having emotion is just the more that you have emotion, the more that you are living out your subjective truth. Like saying that you are subjectively true and that you have emotion subjectively. But we don't, by living with all these rules and making it so that you have to live within a certain set of mannerisms and you have to live in a box and live by the labels that are associated with the environment or associated with you, like because you yourself are given labels during your life that can apply to your whole life, or they can apply to your life for a group of people. You're given labels, and those labels are meant to limit you. The other people, like if you're given labels, they do limit you so that you are more in a box to other people. If other people, I mean, it's not always evident what your labels are. Sometimes they are like your reputation and everybody calls you a certain label. Or it could just be a characteristic. You have this characteristic, and that characteristic is your identity because everybody knows you're that characteristic. Like everybody knows you have a short attention span or something, so that's just what you are. Like everybody says that you have ADD, so then you have ADD, like because that's the identity that's been given to you. And so you have to live with that identity of ADD because like you probably show signs that you are somebody who has that, but that's your label your entire life, even if you're not diagnosed with it. You're just like, oh, I have that characteristic, and you can build it into your personal, like subjective identity as much as you want. But the more that you do that, I think in a lot of cases, it's not really a good thing to like totally say it to yourself and make it part of your identity, because your identity, your subjective identity is pretty unlimited, I would say. So I wouldn't say you want to limit yourself with stuff like that, because there isn't. What's so great about that? What's so great about having ADD? It's okay for other people to say that about you, like, oh yeah, I do, like I have a short attention span, whatever. But don't make it so that that's what you are, so that because there's nothing in that. That's not, that doesn't do anything for you. There's nothing in that, especially when you can be so many other things. Even if, like, even intelligent or smart, like you're smart. Wow. And you can build that into your identity and be like, wow, I'm smart. That's a very easy one to build into your identity. Like, yeah, I'm smart. Wow, I am. So then you start carrying out your life. If you make it subjectively to yourself that that's your identity, you limit yourself to smart. That's the thing. Like, other people can give you characteristics, but don't take them too far. Don't give yourself one as a result of lots of people calling you that, is what I think. I think other people can identify you, and that's what identity is for. But you yourself shouldn't identify yourself. You shouldn't live with "I am smart" because it's not that great to be smart. Like, oh wow, I'm smart. And then at the point that you say that you're smart, then you start living out that way and acting and saying things. You say things with the authority of a person who is smart because you've given yourself that authority entirely. But it's okay to do that. It's just like, it's the question, because it's an argument to me. The question is, do you have to, at some point, to yourself, identify yourself? I don't think you do. I don't think you do. You don't have to at some point take on an identity. No. I don't think that that's a positive way of living, but maybe it is. Maybe you do. Is that just you get older? But you can grow up by accepting other people's labels for you without just like taking them on singularly. I mean, everything in moderation. You don't want to just be smart and then but you can be, though. You can just be smart. And and go really into it. Like, oh, my identity is smart, or my identity is something really abstract. Like, my identity is having one. My identity is having an identity, which is what I want. My identity is having an identity. But it could be just one, and then you are that identity. Like, oh, he's smart. But if you believe that to yourself, that you're smart, then you start talking like a smart person. You know, you're like, oh, I do. Yeah, I guess so. It's like you harness the energy you have to be smart that you probably are, like you had before, but now you have distinguished yourself to one thing. You're like, and I'm going to be that. And then you start living that out. Like, oh, yeah. So sometimes the things that other people call you do play into your overall identity, but they do influence you to take it on to yourself subjectively, so that it is even then reflected back that you're smart. Like, they influence you to be this thing. Like, if enough people call you that, but you don't want to limit yourself, especially to something that's limiting. Like, what's so great about being smart when there's so much more that you can be, that you yourself, you're more than smart, you're more than one thing, and you should live out that way, even if society and the consciousness that we manifest, the consciousness is what we do. Like, all of our speech and all of our interactions is our consciousness. Like, even though consciousness and our normal set of interactions in society, like even America, like the English language and the culture that's practiced in America, and the collective consciousness of America, and that would even include like just our perception of the country, is like the collective consciousness, like us looking consciously at everything and defining it and relating it to ourselves, and looking at other people and defining them and giving them characteristics. That for America is America's collective consciousness. So like, we have this collective consciousness that includes all the cultural norms that we have to practice, that we do practice as part of our consciousness and our way of defining everything. So that collective consciousness is limited to what it means to be an American, or the identity of America, of being an American, especially with that identity in comparison to other countries' identities, but also in comparison to like all the countries that have ever existed, like all civilizations and cultures that have ever existed. When you consider all of those and all the ones that could potentially exist, you consider how much the identity of America is distinguished and how much our collective consciousness is more limited to like a finite set of things of like being an American, but like and the way that we speak about and define things and talk to each other. But like the collective consciousness of America might not be, I'd say there's a good chance that it's not going to be able, it hasn't arrived at a place that it can accept a person that identifies themselves with too many characteristics, that they themselves, rather than just being smart. Like it's easier for people to deal with and digest other people that are just living out like one thing. And because of that, our collective consciousness like pushes people to be one thing a lot of the time. Like we try to influence other people to be one thing a lot of the time so that they can be more controllable and more derivative of patterns that are controllable and manipulatable, because it's easier. It's easier when somebody is just definable to one thing. And so our collective consciousness can push people to do that because it's easier to stick with what's familiar to you, like the identity of America, and individuals within America are going to have an easier time. They're going to accept you if they can define you. And that goes a couple ways. Like you want to make yourself identifiable so that you can be accepted, but also people want to limit you so that they can accept you more easily, rather than, because nobody has any patience, because we don't have the patience to accept you, to take the time to understand the complexities of your emotions and the complexities of your identity. We don't have the patience to do that, especially now. We just want you, it's easier for us to label you as one thing. And because it is easier for people to label each other as one thing, and because we don't have a lot of patience to understand that people are more complex than that, people themselves make themselves one thing so that they can fit in with society, so that they can be accepted. Because the more complex you are, the harder you are going to be for other people to accept, for other people to understand. The more things that you identify yourself to be. Like if you identify yourself to be two things at one time, or three things at one time, like three full identities, like you're smart and you're like three, I'm talking about, and I probably can't think of a good example now. And I don't even like bringing up an example when I'm talking about it. I like to keep it vague, because when you bring up an example, then you compromise the idea at all. When you bring up an example, because then that makes it really specific. And I don't like to try to pick the wrong one, even though it is actually really helpful to bring up the example, because a lot of times I might talk too vaguely about a lot of this stuff. But if you are three personalities that conflict with each other, like you're an amalgam of a lumberjack, somebody who's like a lumberjack, and somebody who's really smart, and somebody who likes to dance, if you're those three things and you're just like, I really identify with these three things, that's harder for people to accept. Like people would be like, well, you're just like a kind of person that doesn't fit in. Like that identity that somebody can convey to America is not going to be very easily accepted, because that doesn't fit in with our collective consciousness of like, no, people aren't that. Like the way that we understand it now, those three things are pretty different, especially lumberjack and dancing. Like that you like dance, like you are a dance, like what? Like a choreographer dance, like a backup dancer type of dance. So you think you can dancer and a lumberjack. And you're like a scientist. You're like a really old mathematician who goes on Joe Rogan, but you're also a lumberjack, and like that's just comical. And so we laugh at that. We often laugh at something that is beyond our scope of understanding. It makes us laugh as long as we consider it comical, as long as we have the right perspective. We see it positively. Then that's something that would make you laugh. But like, so we're not capable of accepting that kind of identity, and there are infinite combinations of identity that we don't accept. Like, we accept certain identities, and the identities that we do accept are at this point an accumulation of other identities. That, like, it used to be, like, what's a good example of something like that? Like somebody who does more things under the same title or under the same heading. They didn't used to do all those things before. But anyways, like a cheerleader, like, we accept somebody who's a cheerleader, but we don't really accept somebody who's a cheerleader and 70 years old too. Like, there's limits everywhere. There's limits for all these identities. There are rules for them. You can be a cheerleader. You can't be a cheerleader and be 40 though. You can be a painter, but you can be a yeah, there's just that. And you can be a political activist, but you can't be a libertarian, because libertarians have silly ideas about how government is supposed to work. Like, you can be a political activist, but you can't be an anarchist. Because, obviously, I mean, anarchists, like, we really don't accept an anarchist. We don't accept atheists. We don't accept, there's everything we don't accept. It is endless what we don't accept, and it is finite what we do accept. It's finite. We accept finite identities, and they are fine. We accept people to be in boxes and to limit them. And because of that, people are more prone to making it so that they fit in with everybody. So they try to identify themselves to, that's where other people can really influence you. You try to identify yourself to be something that you know is acceptable. And that's a fine line. Like, you want to maintain your individuality, meaning, and the more that you maintain your individuality, the more that you validate your subjective reality and validate your emotions, is the more that you harness the potential of your identity and say that different things about you are possibly true, and the more that you reflect those things to the world. Because the more that you are just, because you do want to try to be accepted. That's why it's a fine line. You do want to try to be accepted. That's why identity is so complex. You do want to try to be accepted, but you can't replicate what other people do, because then you're repulsive to people. You can't just replicate. You're revolting. You're repugnant. You can't replicate what other people do, because then you're just a replicator. It can't be really obvious what you're trying to do to be accepted. Your identity can't be really obvious to people, but you can have a somewhat obvious identity as long as you're going far enough into some amount of complexity of your character. You're allowed to be somewhat complex so that you can show that you have value to other people. Like, you can be more complex and say things that are funny, meaning that you say things that are out of the realm of reason, oftentimes out of the realm of what people are expecting, and somewhat irrational. You can say things that are irrational, but you can't say things that are too irrational. Because consciousness only accepts some things. Because consciousness only accepts some things. And, Consciousness, baby. Man, I fucked to consciousness. Yeah. I don't have any problems with it either. You might think I have reservations. I don't. Just get on that motorcycle and ride afterward. Like, whatever sentence you say to your boss, next time, say the exact, you're like, oh, the reports didn't come in last night. But go up to him and say that, and then before he gets to speak again, just say it again in the same tone and delivery. Oh, the reports didn't come in last night. The reports didn't come in last night. The reports didn't come in last night. And he would be like, he's really focused on that. He's really focused on that the reports didn't come in. But if you say it 5 times in a row, then you are a lunatic. Whereas if you just said it twice, like 3 times, that's an acceptable identity. He's like, like it's passable. But if you say it 5 times, he's going to remember it because that is a memorable thing. It's memorable because it was unacceptable. It is unacceptable that you did that you said it 5 times because there's probably something wrong with you that you said it straight. If you say it straight face, that you didn't catch how much of a lunatic you sounded like and how much you went against the rules of consciousness in that moment. Because he would remember it if you said the exact same thing 5 times. He'd be like, oh, that guy's kind of weird, or like he's got something weird going on. He's a weirdo because he didn't obey consciousness for a minute. Because because our society can only accept so much. We accept, and it's like nothing. It's barely anything is what we accept. We accept a finite number of things when you can be unlimited, whatever. But we have to center our identities in rationality and in the practicalness and rationality and decorum and pleasantries and consciousness of the world. Pleasantness, consciousness, same mannerisms. It's the same set of mannerisms. It's the set of them. There's a certain set of mannerisms that you're allowed to carry out within an identity, whatever that identity is. You have a certain set of mannerisms for this group of people, and you have a certain like the jokes or whatever. You have certain jokes, and that's fine. You need that in order to maintain homeostasis. You need those jokes. You need your rituals among your friends in order to maintain the friendship, and that's perfectly fine. You need things to unite behind and agree with. You need consciousness. It's not horrible. It's just that in the state of things that we live in now, it limits our ability to expand on the depth of our emotions at large, where the depth of our emotions, I would argue, basically has no bound. Like you have things to say, and we have to carry on as if everybody's agreeing to a superficial level of emotion expenditure. Was that okay? Was that all right? Was that okay? 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 Is that okay? Do you accept it? Do you accept me? Help. Do you accept me? Was that okay? Help. Do you accept it? Do you accept it? I just want to keep talking. I like the topic. I like the topic. I want to keep talking. I want to keep talking. Please. What more is there to say? Consciousness. Consciousness, 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 consciousness. Yeah, consciousness versus your unconsciousness versus subconsciousness, because your emotions are valid, and that's the thing, is that we don't want to validate each other's emotions, because that's what love is. When you allow somebody else to be a person, when you agree that somebody else is a person rather than you agree that you allow somebody to be a person, you agree to somebody else's subjective reality rather than trying to coerce them into agree with objective reality as practiced by everybody. And objective reality would be the same thing as collective consciousness for whatever group you're considering. The objective reality for America is the collective consciousness of America. But to validate. When you validate somebody else's emotions, you say that their subjective reality is true. And we don't give that very much. And you can live a long time and not get very much of that. Like validation of that your subjective reality is true, that you have emotion, and that you are, because what you are saying with your emotion is that there is something to emote about, that there's something to feel about, that there's something that you yourself feel, because you can only derive genuity from yourself out of what you feel. You can only get to the heart of the truth of your subjective reality through your emotions, more so through what you feel. And they don't have to be emotions like you're crying. It's just emotions like, oh, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm like, you, because you have them is the thing. You have emotions. They're just hidden under layers and layers of consciousness. You have emotions, and they can be set free. It's just that at the point that you're setting them free, you become undefinable to people, because your emotions are whimsical and they don't stay in the same place, and they fluctuate. Your emotions do. When you have a lot of emotion and you say a lot of things that are outside of rationality, because you're just speaking from your own perspective, and you carry out a reality that's specific to you and different from the reality of the rest of the world. But you have emotions. And for you to say, oh, I'm doing bad, when somebody asks you, how are you doing? And they're just like, okay, then they're accepting that you're the kind of person that just like that they're accepting that you felt bad. They're accepting that you have an emotion of feeling bad. And that's what you should do in life. You should just accept when somebody's feeling bad, rather than always try to fix it or figure out what the problem is. Because the problem might be too complex. But people are, like, you are a person, you know. And so because of that, you do have sadness. That's the thing. It's like we want to carry on like nobody has sadness for real. Like, oh, well, you're not really sad because you just aren't taking the steps necessary to fix it. You're not going to the lengths. Oh, you must be, it's probably just that you're depressed and you're not taking the steps necessary to fix it. You're sad. You're sad. Oh, why are you sad? Like, it's because you're just not, when really you can be sad about nothing and not be able to explain what you're sad about. And you can just be sad. But if people are going to tell you, like, to be happy, then that's just more in line with telling you that you're not a person at all. And telling you that you don't really have that emotion. You don't have sadness. Like, if they just want you to agree to consciousness, and like, if just generally you're not really allowed to be like feel bad about it, and if you do feel bad about it, then we have to fix the problem or whatever. We have to figure out what's wrong. Like you just have that. You have anger. That's the other thing. Anger. You have anger. But anger, there's lots of people that don't accept other people's anger. Anger is a more difficult one. That's more difficult. I don't really know what to say about that. But you have a lot of emotions and things to be. Emotions rock pretty hard. I don't care. I'll say it. I'm serious. I stand behind that. All right. Well, I'll have more podcasts in the future, and I will in the future for your health. I'll have podcasts. I'll have podcasts in the future. Yes, I'll have podcasts in the future. I don't know when. I don't know. Bye. Talk to you. And all right, so I'll have podcasts. Okay, well, it was nice chatting with all of you. It's been very real. Have good dreams tonight, and don't let the bed bugs bite. Say your prayers, and soon be fair.